Okay. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of our Knowledge Bites series of short webinars from the Southern Vermont Economy Project. These short webinars are just designed to connect you to resources and tools that you can use right away. We hope they're useful. We do record them and share all the materials afterwards so that they can live as an archive on our site. So today we're actually excited because uncharacteristically we get to share about something that we've done. Usually we invite guests, but we are our own guest today. Let me start by talking a little bit about what our program is. The Southern Vermont Economy Project is a program that's hosted by the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, although it spans Bennington and Windham counties. We have partial funding from the USDA through a Rural Community Development Initiative grant that's designed to help us do training and technical assistance that supports local projects that are important to our communities across Southern Vermont. So today, yes, as I was saying, we are our own guest, and we're talking about tools for strengthening local leaders that really came out of some work that we've done over the past year. Now I need to figure out how to advance my slides, of course. There we go. Okay, so really, local leadership is a strength in Southern Vermont, all across Vermont, really. Vermont's communities are powered by really dedicated volunteers, so that's a positive. The challenge I think we all know and experience is that boards and committees have trouble filling spots, and that is real in all our communities of all sizes. Part of the problem that we face is that this is a classic, it's everyone's job, it's no one's job, to sort of try and turn that around and find solutions. Like, we all are very well aware of the problems. How do we find solutions? And there's a lot of things where it's everyone's job, it's no one's job. So we kind of set out through our program, we respond to what we feel are needs and ways that we can help build capacity. So we started this Get On Board, So Vermont Get On Board, which is a Southern Vermont Economy Project program. And really, we did in this program what we do in all of our programs, which is that we bring together resources. So statewide, local, existing resources. We're not reinventing the wheel. We bring things together. We make them available in one place and sort of bring them to you so they're easier to access and more easily digestible. And we also do a lot of work in creating networks, because that is a huge backbone of our program. And so in this case, we were trying to build a network of support for new and existing volunteers to sort of help fill that pipeline. So I'm going to send you these slides and you can click through. We did a recap of each of these, so I suggest just, they're really short summaries of what we covered in the program. But basically, we decided to divide this into 4 units. We talked about building community capital, sort of civic capital, but all the different forms of capital and value that we have in our communities. So social capital, civic capital, natural resource capital, as well as financial capital, and talked about how all those resources build community, all the needs that we have in our communities, and who's in charge of meeting those needs. Again, a lot of everyone and no one situations there. So it was really useful. We also brought in a bunch of community leaders to come in and talk about their experience and what had made a difference to them and supported them. And that was a great conversation. There's a recording of that that's linked when you follow these links in the slides. The second unit, we really dove into local government in Vermont and talked about, how it works, how it doesn't work sometimes. And Ted Brady from VLCT gave a big presentation. And then we also spent some time talking about really doing some focused thinking about how to be more inclusive in who is in government, in terms of who is at meetings, who is running meetings, and really developing some intentionality. So Ray Garofano did a wonderful presentation that really we built on throughout the rest of the program. She brought us some really great ideas. And we also did a very powerful session with Susan Clark. In fact, we've asked her to come back to our Southern Vermont Economy Summit, so more people can do that that session on, it's a workshop on navigating polarities and how to have conversations in ways that honor opposing viewpoints. So that was all folded into thinking about local government. It was really a very interesting and multifaceted class. We also then kind of went into another unit 3, where we talked about working together as a community. So not every project lives in government in our communities. So we really talked about having projects that are community driven and how those interact with both the nonprofit world and just sort of community boards or looser organizations. So we brought VCRD in to give us a presentation. And we also worked in a lot of thinking about nonprofit boards into that segment. And then finally, and I think this is one that might seem fluffy, but we had a session where people really built intention for themselves and thought about projects that they wanted to do and ways that they wanted to take action based on what they had learned in the class. And sort of building that forward has been really, I think, important. So now that's what we did, and some of the partners that we brought in. And you can ask me more questions about that, but I will send you these slides and feel free to click each of these links and just sort of look through what's there. So here's some key takeaways that we developed that will hopefully help you. We really kind of honed in on what is it that volunteers need to do their job? Like what do they need from us, from the world? And clearly volunteers at every level need to feel welcome to participate. So that's through messaging and follow through at meetings, just making sure that meetings really are a place that people feel welcome. You know, volunteers also need to be aware that there's a need for them. I think we assume in Vermont that everybody knows that our communities are volunteer powered, but maybe everyone doesn't know that. And maybe people don't, or maybe they just don't know where to get started. So I think letting people know clearly where they're needed, where they can jump in, is something that we established as a real need for us on sort of on the community level to make clear. Volunteers also really need to feel confident in their work. If they don't know what their job is, there's a lot of uncertainty, and out of uncertainty comes fear, and out of fear does not come good decisions, right? So helping leaders feel confident, knowing what they're supposed to be doing and what their job entails and what's expected of them is really important. And that can be done through creating materials or just through making sure that people have access to training opportunities. People also need to feel supported. And a lot of that can come from, you know, just general team building, but also mentorship. So being really intentional about having people who have been doing something for a long time interact with a new board member is really, really important. And making that, you know, making a structure wherein that is sort of encoded is really helpful for people. People really spoke about mentorship as a way that they really learned their jobs. Finally, one of the things we heard about volunteers, you know, it's really hard being on a town committee or, you know, being on a select board sometimes. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions. Sometimes you have to make decisions with the best of your knowledge that maybe doesn't feel totally adequate. It's a difficult job. And so feeling appreciated by your community makes that job easier. It wasn't really something that we had thought about, but it was something that our participants really raised as an idea of communities intentionally building in ways to let those leaders feel appreciated and supported, which could take a lot of different forms. So those are sort of the basics of what volunteers need. So one of the big things that we took away was sort of to create a pipeline cultivation program that's ongoing and that's intentional. So creating this pipeline of volunteers, as we know, it's not just going to happen, right? It may not be happening. It takes a concerted effort to do this work, which feels really daunting. But one of the things that we really took away from this program is it isn't so daunting if you create structures and you do a little all the time. So we're going to share a resource that we sort of put together that gives you bite-sized things that are really impactful. Basically, it's sort of taking that everyone's job, no one's job problem and trying to create intentionality, integrating, creating succession and creating a pipeline into the work of your board so that it is someone's job But it's sort of everyone's job, so that if we create a culture where it's like you need to just do certain things all the time that are creating a pipeline, then the pipeline will feel like it's just happening. It's just that it's not going to happen automatically. It is going to take some work. So building that pipeline really can start with some simple first steps, being really more intentional and vocal about inviting community participation at meetings. You know, meetings are like that gateway to getting involved. You go, you listen, you participate, and now you're like, well, I could be in that other seat over there. If I don't like what's happening, I should run for office, right? So getting people involved in local meetings and just really being sure that you're getting the word out and letting people know that their input is welcome and making those meetings a welcoming place. Really focusing on those starter positions. So getting people in the door. Where are the positions that, you know, is there a library board, a recreation board, in which people have to maybe go interact with other boards and get to know how things work in their town and get involved. So what are those sort of starter positions in your town? And are you consciously creating a pipeline through those starter positions and then knowing who's in those positions? So here's another thing. This actually came from Ray Garofano, you know, creating intentionality about who should be in the room is really important. Like whose needs need to be represented when we're having community conversations. Sometimes keeping a spreadsheet of, you know, everyone who's currently on a board and what board they're in. And then also some, you know, some candidates of like, well, you know, so-and-so comes to meetings a lot. Maybe they would be, maybe we could ask them to get more involved, or just sort of having a list of people that, you know, if every board sort of can spit out, every person on every board can spit out the names of a few people that they know in the community who they think might be interested, then you're not starting from nothing. And if it's sort of an ongoing process of making sure that we're thinking about who we might want to be involved, and then remembering that people won't say yes the first time. So don't give up on people. If you ask them to be on a board, don't just cross them off your list. You know, ask them again. Well, maybe ask them another time, or ask them if there's a different way that they might be able to become involved, or another position they might think of. So, and don't be discouraged if people don't say yes. Sometimes you have to ask them. Sometimes they have to hear from more than one person. So if they hear from you, and then they hear from their neighbor, and then they hear from someone else, hey, you know, you would be really great on the planning commission. If they've heard it from 3 different people, they might actually be like, you know what, people keep telling me that, maybe I'll give it a try. So it's that matter of, don't give up on people, and maybe have multiple people ask, and don't give up. So that's just a few simple first steps that we thought of. So for further learning, we have a bunch of resources. So we had actually last week, we had VLCT come on. KB stands for Knowledge Bites. We had them come on and just do a presentation about all their resources, because one of the things that we find is, you know, every year there's turnover on boards or turnover on select boards, and people may be entering and need training, and there's just a constant need for refreshing training. You know, I love that our town moderators, who are so amazing, every year go to a town moderator tune-up, because they're like, we need to be ready for this big day. And even though we did it last year, let's just keep doing that tune-up. So VLCT is a wonderful resource that will offer ongoing trainings, and people should know about that. So you can certainly just go review our Knowledge Bites that talks about that, or share that with everybody, because they offered a lot of their resources. We also did nonprofit board development Knowledge Bites with Catherine Sims, which was so like, we got a lot of ideas from that actually too. The idea of sort of keeping a spreadsheet and how to keep track of like who is on your boards and what their perspective is and what skills they have, to sort of think of like what we might be missing or who we might be missing. That really came from not only Ray Garofano, because that was one of her big recommendations for creating equity and inclusion, but that was also something that Catherine Sims recommended. So in this nonprofit board development Knowledge Bites, there's a lot of really good resources. We will be offering another Get on Board cohort. I mean, it's still TBD. We have a big event next week, and after we get through that event, we'll really turn our focus on how and where and when we'll do the Knowledge Bites. But we do expect to run another cohort of that to keep that learning and that network going, because I think what people really appreciated in the course was the chance to meet other current leaders, new leaders, and really exchange ideas. And then again, always reach out to us. We're happy to help point you to relevant training opportunities that you need for your boards anytime. So I'm going to see if this works. I'm going to click on this. This is our little sheet, and we're going to share this with everybody. That seems to be working on my end. Can everybody see the sheet? Great, Rachel's nodding. So this is sort of be a board everyone wants to join. This is a little flyer that we made that sort of put together 12 action steps. And we thought, you know, there's 12 months of the year. There's 12 action steps. You know, committees and boards often meet, if not twice a month, once a month. And that if you can integrate one of these practices into your agenda, you know, putting it on the agenda is key. Once a month, you're doing that little bit every time. So this is a general list that is for nonprofit and municipal boards. So you can sort of read it broadly and you can interpret and you can change. They're just suggestions. But one of the things that we really find helps people is sort of job descriptions. That is knowing what I'm supposed to do, what's expected of me, how much time I'm supposed to spend on this, and like, what is my mission is actually really important. So there's a link here to a list that our wonderful town clerk in Townsend, Olenka, made that just has a short description of what does the select board do, what does the planning commission do, what does the development review board do. So something that's worth maybe creating kind of customized to your town, or just having that on your website somewhere. And you may already have that on your town website. So it's a matter of just putting it in a place where people can find it and refer to it and sort of know what each committee or board does. Training is something that's really important because it exists, but do we always access it? So this is something that we recommend, is that just really keep a running list, you know, make this someone's job on the board to say, can you just be in charge of keeping track of, you know, some training opportunities, and make sure that each board member attends a training or conference once a year. You can even add that into your job descriptions if that's something you're doing for your, like, you're expected as a board member to attend one training a year. Many trainings are free, some are not. So it's a good idea to think about including funding for trainings in your annual budget. So for towns, just thinking about, is there a place in our town budget that we could ask voters to say, you know, we want to have some funding available so that our town board members can attend trainings, and put that in there, build it in so that they have the opportunity, and that it's something that you pay attention to. So onboarding packet for new members, this is sort of like with basic information to say, okay, great, welcome. You're now a select board member. Let's make sure you know what you're supposed to do and have all the information you need in one place. And that's important for nonprofit boards and for town boards. And again, this is the list of having a board prospects list where you sort of pay attention to this and add people, think of people that would be good candidates for succession regularly. And then mentoring, pairing new board members with longer serving mentors for their first year, and doing that consciously, making a buddy system. And exit interviews are just sort of when someone leaves, find out what would have helped them, or what did help them, or what was useful. And there's some links here for sample questions. These questions are more geared towards nonprofit boards, but anything is applicable for volunteers. You know, board prospect meetings in a municipal level, this might look like making sure that someone who's thinking of running or being on a board attends a couple of meetings to see what it's like, and then maybe has the chance to follow up one-on-one with another member of that board before they decide to run or ask to be appointed. You know, self-evaluation, this can be done on a municipal as well as a nonprofit level by just saying, you know, who's been on here, when are people expiring? Do we really need to think about getting some new people on? Are people thinking about coming back? Or who is really thinking about retiring next year? So how urgent is our search for new members at this moment? It should always be sort of ongoing, but that helps you sort of focus. You know, having board member bios somewhere so people can know who they're working with might be fun. It doesn't necessarily have to happen at a municipal level, but I think it's just helpful for people to get a sense of who's there and and why they do what they do. Public engagement, obviously for municipal meetings, that's super important and required by law, but just sharing what you do and finding ways to sort of get out in the public besides at select board meetings. So is it possible to provide opportunity for input at public events? Is it possible to have a ice cream social where you can come meet board members, meet the people who are in your municipal government, piggybacking on another town event, have everyone march in a parade. I don't know, whatever it is that works for your community, having ways to engage with the public that it's not necessarily a formal meeting can be really important, just so people sort of know what's going on. And then it's that welcoming piece. And then this would sort of tie into celebrating together, having some kind of social gathering. And that's where just having sort of a town board fair or something where people can come in and it's really just a chance to meet each other and be together and, have some ice cream and celebrate the work that you do all year. So our hot tips at the bottom, this might be the most important thing on here, which is select a member of your board or committee who's sort of in charge of these actions. And being in charge of them really means making sure they get added to the agenda. I mean, that is the most important thing. Adding these things consciously to an agenda and planning the discussions around them is just a way of making it intentional. So often this is an excellent job for a vice chair who's there to run meetings if the board chair isn't there, but isn't the one who's the secretary who's taking the notes and making sure those get published in a timely fashion, to meet open meeting laws, for the, the chair who's building the agenda and making sure it gets posted. So find someone on the board who has the bandwidth to just pay a little bit of attention to this aspect of the board can be really helpful. So then it is everyone's job, because everyone will be talking about it, but it's someone's job to make sure that it happens. And so really it's just sort of creating accountability. And then again, just making sure that the board development is a regular part of the board's operations. And I think that can happen in a nonprofit world, but also in the municipal world, in sort of public meetings, if it helps that, intentionality, the public nature of the meeting is like publicly we're making it known that part of what we do is invite other people to join us and invite new voices to be here, and that we will support them coming. So with that, that's my very probably too long spiel, but we really learned a lot through this program. And I would love to just now open it up, I think, to questions. Let me just go back to being able to see everybody. So feel free to, ask questions, turn on screen sharing, share your reactions to what we shared. Really anything. We're open to hearing from people who have experienced this in real time. Does anyone want to open up with a wondering or a experience?
Well, I'm curious if anybody has done anything like this too, if you wanted to share. But Edie, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, first of all, thank you for starting the Get On Board program. I can say that for the town of Halifax, we did end up taking our delegate to your program and asking them to join a committee. Just a reflection that that onboarding didn't really work terribly smoothly, because once a year as a select board, we have to appoint dozens of people for dozens of positions. And, it would have been nice if I had also wanted to go to the meeting of the committee that was there, but honestly, I don't have capacity for it. You've given some other tips here, and I got feedback from the board chair saying, would have been nice to have an introduction. And I'm like, yep, you're right. It would have been, I could have done that better. At the same time, I didn't have everyone's email address on that committee. So, it's just, again, it's a difficult thing. I do think that it's valuable to think about things this way. We certainly have elected positions that nobody runs for, that kind of thing. So I think as a community, Halifax is still really going to be reactive to this for a while, but this has given us some good tips for trying to recruit and then retain people, right? And give them some opportunities to plug into the system. It's interesting. We have had a couple come to the select board meetings lately and say, I want to help. And I'm like, but my list is mostly full unless you want those elected positions that nobody seems to want. At the same time, I think that I have the sense now of which folks are not really actively doing much with their role. And maybe that would be an opportunity to say, well, why don't you go ping this person and then see if they need some help, right? Something like that. And I think one other thing that I've been thinking about is maybe trying to do a meet so-and-so and just do a little bio of each person, put it on the website, or invite them to show up at the Halifax Cafe that's operating 2 days a week, and just say, you know, we'll get you up there so that people will know that you're available to say hello along the way. So anyway, thank you. Many good tips. I look forward to getting the material. And I also was glad to hear that there's going to be another cohort, because that couple that's coming and saying, what can we do? They're going to be asked if they want to go.
That's fun, right? Because people say, how can we help? And it's good to know where. And Edie, I would say too, part of this is to sort of the idea of kind of spreading it out. So helping the other board so that it's not, you know, the select board ultimately appoints everybody, of course, but it's like, you know, I've been a planning commission member, and sort of distributing that and saying, okay, like planning commission, like you need to make some of this your job, and finding who on the planning commission, and, you know, again, who is it on that board, who is the person that's going to roll with that. And that's a very town by town, person by person thing, of course. And since we're, especially in small towns, you know, you kind of like, right, if you don't know what you're doing, someone else does. That can be, you know, hopefully you can distribute that a little bit and sort of like share these ideas so that it's not just, you know, although the, you know, the select board, of course, ultimately appoints everybody, but can other boards sort of be made responsible for doing this, and then doing it as a community effort. So I love that you have the Halifax Community Cafe. Like that's like the perfect place for something like this. If there's a type of a gathering that you do in your community, or a regular gathering where people can be invited in and kind of dip their toe in the water, but also share what they do. Because there's this sort of like a veil of mystery sometimes, even though our meetings, there's open meeting law and meetings are public and open, they don't always feel like something that's for me.
We have work to do, and we don't always have the opportunity to stop and reflect and try to be welcoming. It's like, we got to get through the agenda, and it's already right. So yeah. So I love the idea of people coming to the Halifax Community Cafe, because that is not that's a much more gentle way to encounter. Anyone else have thoughts or suggestions or things that have worked? Feel free. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Meg. Hi, everybody. Thanks. I'm sitting here at my desk, and just so pleased that you all have been, you know, offering these opportunities to folks. And I work across the state as a equity consultant, and I work with school boards and select boards and municipalities. And when I saw this come up on one of my emails from BDCC, I just said, oh, I just want to chime in and hear what's happening, because this is the work that is so desperately needed in so many places. I know across New England, but particularly in Vermont. So just a shout out to you all as people are, you know, trying to find these opportunities to build the skills. The piece that I just wanted to also, again, shout out, and so pleased to hear you talking about it. And I know that's a lot of organizations like VLCT and others have been talking about this idea of welcoming communities, and like, how do we create opportunities for people who, you know, may have, for example, not been born and raised in Vermont, or we have such an increase in the state with our new American population and folks who are resettling. And so, you know, part of the conversation statewide is also thinking about what kinds of things do we need to pay attention to when we're bringing folks into and welcoming them into boards or even into communities. But if we want them to take up positions of leadership, is the culture in those spaces, one where they feel comfortable and they feel like they can bring themselves. And So again, just appreciating that that's something I think that we will continue to wrestle with as the demographics change in the state. But there's, you know, lots of good conversations that I think need to happen, because my sense is that if the messaging was out there, that communities are really working around this idea of building welcoming communities and paying attention to how bias shows up, or, you know, other kinds of issues of difference, I think that a lot of folks would feel more able to come into those spaces because they know that people are having the conversation. It's almost like when we don't talk about it, it's kind of like colorblind. It's like we pretend we don't see it, we pretend we don't talk about it. And then it makes folks who are not necessarily part of the majority population feeling like, is that really a place where I can be? So I just wanted to thank you for mentioning that. And as Meg knows, this is something that I keep you know, in emphasizing in different places across the state, and certainly in Windham County and Brattleboro.
Yeah, and I will also say appreciate that as part of our cohort, we really actually got into some kind of difficult conversations about people like, what do you do if you're that person that's on the board that doesn't hold the majority view, and how do you navigate that? We had some actually really, so it was that this cohort really gave us the opportunity to have those conversations. Like, I feel like Rachel can nod her head too. Like I think we got into some kind of uncomfortable places, and it was a great discussion of people really saying like, well, you know, I am that person, and reacting to people sort of, what do you do if you didn't feel heard, or you feel uncomfortable? So that was a great conversation. And I think it was, you know, we're really lucky to have the opportunity, and sort of bringing a cohort together is to be able to have those conversations. So that was, yeah, we really, we appreciated that. And so thank you, Mary. And I think it's really, Ray Garofano was wonderful, who came and did a presentation for us, because her big thing was really just saying, you know, thinking about who's going to be affected by the decisions that are being made, and then sort of trying to make sure they're in the room. But that's, you know, that sounds easy. Sounds super easy, right? It's not as easy as it sounds. We know that, of course, but just sort of thinking in that way, and then helping people just be in that room. And I think it takes it takes work, but hopefully it takes a little bit of work along the way. So it's, you know, and we all have to realize that, you know, sometimes small steps are fantastic. And Edie, it sounds like you're doing that. Anyone else? I see Hannah is here. I know you live in a town that doesn't have a lot of people, so finding people is always hard. Hopefully this is helpful with some ideas.
Yeah, it is really hard to find people in a tiny town, and I think that the culture, like, I think you kind of, sorry, I missed a little bit of this presentation. I had to step out for a call, but I did catch something that was sort of about creating this culture of like welcoming and, you know, recruiting volunteers. And I think that that's true. And it's really hard to sort of change the old guard culture of local government. And I don't know, like, I feel like Athens is lucky to have the bare minimum amount of people needed to fulfill the positions. But then there is kind of this shell of like, we don't have capacity to invite more people in to change how things are done, or to expand beyond doing the bare minimums. And I don't know what, you know, I try to do a bunch of that. I get myself in trouble a lot, but yeah, I feel like it's a very long-term project.
Well, I think, you know, going back to, I think sometimes one of the things we talked about in our program was that some of that work happens like outside of what happens in the select board, or outside what happens in municipal government, so that community projects are also really important for building community and bringing people in. So when you have things like a community center project, or, you know, the Halifax Cafe, or in Marlborough, there's, you know, community center, where if there's places where people can get together in a community way, that's sort of something that's owned and managed by the community, that's not necessarily like the select board. That to me is such a wonderful, like, to talk about a gateway, but in a good way, so that people can sort of start there in a way that feels manageable, that feels friendly, that is social, you know, it doesn't even just feel social, it sort of is social, and it's building community. So I think when we did our program, we thought about, of course, getting people volunteers to serve on the planning commission is important, but maybe just as important is getting people who feel like they can be involved in a project or start a project, and then they feel comfortable interacting with someone is going to have to go to the select board and ask for money at some point, right? Maybe. So that was sort of one of the things we talked about in our program is like, it also may not be about, you might not, like being on the select board might not be what you want to do, but you really might be like the person who can make your library a resource that makes your community a place where people want to live. And that's also great. And so we sort of really looked at the diversity of roles too. So I would just say, always pay attention to the other ways and that sort of community. Government is really important and it's critical, and hats off to all of you who do that work. But then also just community projects can also be important. And sometimes that's where people start. And then, before they know it, they're doing more and being on other boards. So really for us, it was really just about helping people come up with small bites and intentionality and thinking that it's everyone's job. It's no one's job. So you don't have to do it all. You don't have to be like, it's going to be my job to make sure that boards are recruiting, but it's going to be my job to let boards know that this is work they need to do, right? So you can sort of find someone in the community who can sort of push it out, and share these ideas. And we hope to do that more. Does anyone have any follow-up comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll take off, and we will provide some more updates on this, and we will, of course, let everyone know when we are able to launch the next cohort. And that's wonderful that there's people already sort of thinking about it. And what we really try to do is a holistic thing to sort of say there's a whole spectrum of community involvement, right? The select board is one thing, the planning commission is another thing, but there's also other ways that you can be involved and that communities can invite. So that's sort of what our philosophy.
Edie, did you have something else you wanted to add? I see you're on camera.
I guess I was reflecting on the fact that when COVID hit, one of the things that we lost was what I used to call the post-meeting meeting, with everybody standing out in the parking lot afterwards and, ideally listening to the spring peepers, but often having the follow-up, well, why didn't they do this or that, right? And those opportunities to connect on a personal level, we haven't found ways to build that into a hybrid meeting, which might be an interesting thing to try, like having a closing room or whatever. So, where people say, bye, hope your surgery goes well, that kind of stuff, right? So there was that, and I think the other thing was just at VLCT recommended at the last town meeting that you don't have this other non-binding business, but that you hold a special select board meeting. And we held a special select board meeting, and one of the two topics on the conversation was about becoming a welcoming community and following through with the program, which name is escaping me right now, where you sign something saying you're welcoming. And it was a difficult conversation because there were people who weren't maybe so interested in being welcoming, but I came to the realization that those people also need to feel represented, also need to feel like they can come into a meeting and state their diverse opinion and still, be able to potentially be somebody we tap into for some of these positions. So, I just sort of acknowledging that that is challenging, but it's important. And I really, unfortunately, don't feel like I have a day to commit to the Southern Vermont Economic Summit, but I'm really interested in this Susan Clark navigating polarities thing. So I'll give it another think, but I don't have a heck of a lot of vacation time left. So anyway, just thank you.
Well, we can talk offline. Maybe we'll figure out. Maybe we can figure out a way. That was a great conversation. So her idea is it's sort of finding both and solutions, and it's a way of. There's also a book on navigating polarities, which is a pretty quick read, but it's about sort of saying how do you sit in both sides of an issue, and then what if you could sort of sit in the other person's side of it. They can sit in your side of it. Sometimes what comes out of that is a really different understanding of a way to solve a problem without, it doesn't feel like compromise. It just feels like, let's take the best of this and the best of that, and let's not go to the bad place where it's like, you're wrong, I'm right. And like, don't sit in the wrongness, try and find the rightness of both sides and then bring those together. So you sort of get these both and solutions. And it's a really powerful way to do it. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes, it's again, all this stuff sounds so easy from where we sit. But it is a really powerful exercise. So we really appreciated that, and we'll keep trying to make that available. I think with that, we are at,
if the board was the board fairly evenly split or evenly on a spectrum of gender diversity? Because the picture that you showed a lot of women, and I was curious about that.
It was interesting. We did actually have a lot of women in our cohort. We really did, which was interesting. And I think partly, yeah, and we thought that was wonderful because we're like, yay, like, you know, a lot of like, you know, younger women joining our board, we thought was great. Yeah, it just did sort of happen that way. I don't know if that was, you know, we have a sample of one of our cohort. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next time. But we did have a lot of really, you know, I would say it was more women than men. Rachel, do you have, I don't know if I don't think I ever analyzed the demographics, but we did have a lot of women who did take the course, which was great. It was a really nice group of people too. And we had a whole knitting circle that happened because there's a lot of handicraft makers. So we loved that. Anyway, I know people are jumping off because they have to go, but you know, we invite this conversation to continue, and we'll certainly let people know when we have other cohorts, and we always accept feedback and ideas and ways that, you know, we can help you. We're happy to do our best to do that. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye.
Thanks, Edie. Bye-bye.